Hi, this is Adina here with today's episode of Courage to be Curious with Adina Tovel, where every week we are asking and pursuing questions that help us to wonder our way to brilliant. And this week we are in our leadership strand, and I feel so incredibly grateful to be here with the guests that we have today as we pursue another piece of our monthly theme in the power of questions. And I have here with me Will Wise, who is the author of so many things, right? Will is he's co-founder of Me to We, Me and We and Me, We and Me. I figure I should do that to you since people are always doing that to me, right? Speaker, coach, author of Ask Powerful Questions, Create Conversations That Matter. You see, if you're watching on the video, you see my little tag sticking out from all the places that I've perused this. And mostly, Will is a self-identified chief weologist, creating we's from a whole bunch of me's that are floating out there in the world. And I would also say fellow traveler who is really curious about people and about the way we relate to each other and communicate with each other. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited, Will, to have you here with us today. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm honored.
I will be telling you a little bit more about what Will does in the professional world, both as we go on and at the end and things like that. But let's just sort of begin with saying that, Will, I would describe it. I want to just that you are the person who really helps us to start making that mind shift from the me into that we, where we're in relationship with each other. And before I even ask you anything, I just had to pull this one line out of your book that I want to say, if I could make this the tagline for today's episode, it would be so beautiful, right? It says, you have this line in here that says, are you ready to dance with the mystery? Are you ready to dance with the mystery? So let me just ask you, how is this work about asking powerful questions like dancing with mystery?
Wow. You're like super question asker. Like I've been on a few podcasts and this is a great place to start. What a beautiful place to start. I also feel like we're starting at 120 miles an hour.
I know, right? Like none of this, like, oh, tell me what you do and what inspired you to write the book. Like, okay, yeah, but let's talk about something interesting.
So I so appreciate your courage to be curious. And I do really think it takes a certain amount of courage. And say the line again that you pulled from the book.
Are you ready to dance with the mystery?
The reason why I ask is because just recently I said it different, slightly different, but are you ready to dance with the mystery is, for me, letting go of the routine and stepping into the unknown. And we have lots of people in our life where we could be really predictable of what their future is going to be like, right? You just cut and paste and cut and paste their past and just put it in their future, and their life is going to be pretty predictable. And the invite to dance with the divine, the mysterious, the unpredictable, the unknown is moving from a place of predictability into unpredictability. And one of my students recently really attached to this idea of creating a moment to wonder and allow that wonder to turn into awe and just be awe-inspired. And every single person that you run into knows something that you don't. And if we can be open to whatever their life experience has been, whatever it has taught them, even if they have views that are different than our own, what's shaped them, what's caused them to be the way they are currently in the world, is a dance with the marvelous, the unknown, the sacredness, the divine, if I'm so bold to say. And when we can step into that mystery, there's a way that somehow our own hearts get lighter, their hearts get lighter, and we're actually seen and heard and understood, maybe for the first time. That's the world I want to live in.
I love that. And it's interesting because this, sometimes we hesitate to use the word divine, right? In work like this.
I found myself hesitating.
Yeah. Right. I saw that. And my kids went to Quaker schools. And the core tenet of belief in Quaker schools is there is that of God in each of us. Mm. And, in this work, as you said, as we pursue these conversations, as we seek to know and understand each other, it is that work of, let me see if I can touch and connect with that divine within you. And if I can share that piece of divine within me. Mm. And that in the work that you do, that's what's happening, right? Like that's the spark and the beauty and the magic of what's occurring. That's the mystery.
Yeah, I'm just now, you just made something click for me. So when I graduated from college, I graduated with a degree in forestry the first time. And decided to do Peace Corps because I wanted to connect with people who were close to the earth. I had this thought that I would find it in Peace Corps. And before I went, I did a little bit of research to this country that I knew nothing about, I had no knowledge of. And that was Nepal. And in Nepal, when they say hello, they put their feet together, they put their hands together, and they stop. And the world stops for a moment, and they say namaste. And one translation that I just got so excited about before I left was everything good in me salutes everything good in you. And the spark of the divine within me salutes the spark of the divine in you. And I took that translation and made a real rainbow and wrote namaste and made cards for people as a way of saying goodbye before I went off on this journey. And I didn't know, maybe I didn't even realize until this moment, until you brought it forward, that might have been one of those early moments that created a change within me, that you could actually see the brilliance, the divine in someone else, and you could take a moment to salute it and to just acknowledge it and honor it. Thanks for that memory.
You're welcome. So now that we kind of started off, as you said, going right, at 120 miles an hour into something beautiful for people who are listening and watching, we'll back up a little bit and give them, I almost feel like we've just sort of dove in because I just couldn't wait to get engaged in dialogue with you and to let people know a little bit more what they're in for today. I mean, I think they have some sense about what the treat is. That's the gift that's going to come from this conversation. And the work that you do that comes forth and asks powerful questions, but as part of team building work and conflict resolution and engagement work and coaching and things like that, is really about laying out a process in order to help people learn and cultivate the skill, right? The skill of both asking questions, but asking questions for the purpose of connecting the divine within one to the divine within the other, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the book, you lay out levels through a pyramid of, what are the core components here that enable us to connect in a way. So I've got so many other places to go, but I want to make sure everybody who's listening kind of gets the framework, because we're both in on a secret that we haven't let everybody else in yet. So go ahead and share the pyramid with us.
So in the book is a pyramid. Let me just say a little bit about where it comes from first. Is I was training facilitators to walk into a room full of strangers and talk about things that nobody wants to talk about: race and gender and long-term conflict and climate change. And during that process, we were creating the curriculum to most meet the needs of the facilitators who were learning. And when you think about that, okay, you're going to train people to walk into a room, one thing you might come up with is, well, they have to ask open questions. And yet, there's a style and a way of being that impacts not just the question that you ask, but who you are being while you ask it. And so that caused us to kind of back up a little bit and kind of put puzzle pieces together so that people could navigate a path and really check in with themselves about who they are being before they walk into that room, and then walk the path in such a way that would give them strength. And so the pyramid starts with intention on the bottom. And another way of saying intention is to be in a place that I'm willing to know you, and to check yourself, right? Am I walking in this room as if I'm going to be the expert, or am I walking into this room venturing into the unknown? And then rapport is the next level of the pyramid. And one way to say the rapport is I see you. Next is openness. I hear you. Next is listening, which is I get you. And finally, at the top is empathy, and I'm with you. And these 5 layers, the intention, rapport, openness, listening, and empathy, we kind of distinguish in the book in such a way that even if you think you know something about listening, that it might crack something open new for you and allow you to listen in a new way. I was just doing a listening training for a bunch of social workers who you would think, we've got a lot of experience with listening. And what we recognized in that is that wisdom shows up in the nuances. Listening is one of these things that we're going to be working on for our entire lives. But how do I get out of my own way and listen to the word as it's being uttered without my own biases and opinions and judgments, and step into this unknown? Yeah. So those are the 5 levels of the pyramid. Thanks for asking.
Well, I'm going to ask, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into them.
Okay.
I don't know. This might just prepare yourself if you're listening. It might be about a 5-hour podcast because there are so many places to go. I hope you have a wide open afternoon. Well, you told me some things got moved around, so I hope it's wide open. Intention, it's the first level of the pyramid. It's something we talk a lot about in the spiritual practice world. We talk about it in the mindfulness world. And sometimes I find it's elusive for people. What do we actually mean by intention? And when you're helping to give people an understanding of intention versus goal or, aim or something like that, how do you best describe that to them?
Well, you're pointing to something that's so true. It's so true that you don't know this. Nobody knows this. This is like brand new, like hot off the press. This is our journal, Ask Powerful Questions Guided Journal, a mindfulness journey to skip the small talk and create conversations that matter. And it's in the Amazon warehouse, and it's at our other warehouse, but we haven't told the world about it yet. but it is a journey to allow people to get really clear about what an intention is. And I'll share this quote with you that's on one of the first pages. You are what your deepest desire is. And as is your desire, so is your intention. And as your intention, so is your will. And as is your will, so is your deed. And as is your deed, so is your destiny. And it's from an ancient Vedic text. And what I love about this quote is when I was trying to access people's greatest good in their ability to ask questions and for them to be able to access it, it became really clear that intention comes from within. And goals and purpose are usually outside, and they're usually task-oriented, and they're usually the environment pushing in. But intention, what you can experience with intention is for you to really check in with yourself and say, what is the world that I'm aiming to create? And how can I create that world? And then to be able to speak it at the beginning of a meeting or when people come together and get really clear about that intention and to speak it with some elevated emotion. What it does is it creates a clearing. It creates the rules of the game that you're about to play. And taking 60 seconds to get really clear about your intention can transform the next 60 minutes. It can transform your life or your project. And it allows your brightest, your best self to come forward and to be a part of that game. Yeah. And so to answer your question on a deeper level, what we found when we were sharing this with groups is people were kind of asking that same question. And I remember being in Barcelona working for an organization that had hired us to come in. And I was speaking with the CEO, and he immediately translated, a man who speaks 3 or 4 languages, translated intention into purpose. I was like, whoa, hold on, let's back up. Like, let's go into what's driving you, and how can what's driving you shape your will and shape your deeds and shape the destiny that you're trying to create. And so that was one of the reasons why we created the journal, was to allow people to walk through a guided process that would help unlock that for themselves. Because you're right, it can be nebulous. It can be hard to grab a hold of. But once you do and you speak it, transformation can happen all around you.
All the time. I think you also wrote the journal because you're going to write everything I ever thought about writing before I do. But it's good because then I'll get to claim other things to write. Because you did such a beautiful job with this book. I was like, check, I don't need to do that one because Will did it way better than I did. Will and Chad did it way better than I did. So it's good. The thing about intention, I think, is also this piece that it's felt, right? I mean, we feel it come up, it rises up inside.
Yeah.
And it can only rise and it can only be heard and understood if we're quiet enough and we can trust enough to what we're hearing and experiencing. And I only raise this and I ask about intention, one, because it's the base, it's the foundation. It's totally the foundation for your work, for being present, for asking, for connecting. And we use the word a lot. And I really want to just, as we think about it, it's something, it's a deep practice to be able to really connect with intention. And we have to stop long enough to be able to do it. We have to, as you said, shut out everything on the outside and trust that there is something inside worthy of listening to, which I think is really beautiful. And actually,
what you're bringing clear for me and to share with you and your listeners is that I've done lots of different types of programming and created lots of different curriculum. And I can spend a lot of time thinking about the curriculum and the programming and where I want the students to be and what I want them to be thinking about. Working on the book helps me realize that I should spend the majority of my time on intention. Because I could show up in a room without any curriculum. But if I got really clear about what my intent is and was able to speak it in such a way that other people could either buy into it and say, okay, I'm on board, or they could say, create a counteroffer, right? They could adjust the intention so it fits for them. Whatever we do after that will be that dance with that mysterious piece, right? It at least in most of the intentions that I'm creating around connection, it would allow people to show up fully and to engage. So spending my meditative time, my time driving there, the moments away from the curriculum pieces and getting really clear about the intention has been really fruitful for me. And I've seen it in the people that have really grabbed a hold of this, that CEOs that I'm coaching can walk into a room really not knowing how the meeting's going to go, but stating a really clear intent and inviting people to jump into that suddenly people are leaning in on the edge of their seat, contributing rather than leaning back on their seat and just consuming.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. And I'm glad that you brought that forward. And, we could go up each level of the pyramid and go into each level of conversation, but I have so many other things I want to ask too. And I did feel it was important to start and just spend a little bit of time on intention, because I think what you're saying is absolutely like the mechanics, the curriculum, whether someone changes the time, changes the room, like all these other things could change. But if the intention is really clear, then it's just magic. Like it is magic, right? It's the magic of how things will flow in that direction and allow the outcome to appear in a way that we might never have predicted, never seen coming, never even would have dreamt of. But that is the power of having that strong intention.
Nicely said.
So let's talk about connecting with people. And I have to bring up the story. It not only was the opening story in your book, but I'm excited to see you sort of chuckle about this too. But one of the opening stories in your book is about being on a Greyhound bus and how a question that somebody asked you stimulated a major transformation in your life. So I want to invite you to share that story, and then I will make you chuckle on the backside of it with something. So I want to invite you to share. My intention, right, in having you share it is really when we think about connecting with people, and I'm sure you encounter this all of the time. I've heard this so much. Well, I'm afraid I'll offend them. I'm afraid that I will impose upon their space. I'm afraid if I don't know if it's polite to ask that. We have so many reasons that keep us from asking and then keep us in those separate, very distant we spaces. And we're not seeing what happens when we just do. And so I'd love for you to share that story, and then I'm going to make you laugh on the other side. So go ahead.
Well, I will say about the story is, I don't know how clear I am in the book about this, but up to that moment on the Greyhound bus, I had the ability to hide. So I grew up on the streets, not knowing where my next meal was going to come from, where I was going to sleep that night. There was a lot of unpredictability. And so being able to step into the light and receive help, or to be able to be in the shadows and to be invisible. And I had, the Wises adopted me Um, I was put into foster care with them when I was 9 and adopted with them when I was 12. But by that time, I had learned to really hide. And if I was in a room full of people, I would be in the corner just watching. And so when I was on this Greyhound bus, I called it the Cloak of Invisibility, right? I would just put this cloak on and just hide. And this Amish man with this big smile, big beard, the brimmed hat, just looked at me and saw me, even though I was being invisible. Like, you can't do that. And he asked what my story was. And we started a conversation. And the turning point in that was he was thinking about adopting. And that blew every stereotype. The Amish do this for me. I now live in Amish country, and every stereotype that I create about them gets blown away. There's exceptions to every rule. And when he was talking about adopting, there was a way that his world paused, his face froze. He was really nervous about even mentioning it. And I had a sense that he was breaking through stereotypes of his own and rules and such of his own engagement based upon his society. And I had a strong sense in that moment that if I could share a bit of my story, that would unlock his story and allow him to live to his truest potential. And I shared a bit of my story, and I told him that it changed my life. On that bus, I was headed off to college or to navigate whether or not I was going to go to college. And that wouldn't have been possible without the adoption. I would have probably died or, got involved with drugs and such. And when I shared that with him, I could see him lean forward and be curious, even more so. And we really had an honest conversation in which he saw me for the first time. I hid my adoption like crazy. When people said I looked like my adopted mother, I was like, yeah, right. I would just nod along. There was no genes. I didn't really look like her. But it was easy for people to believe. And when I got off that bus, maybe for the first time in my life, I was floating because he saw me. And maybe I haven't had this clarity until just now and you asking, thank you. And my story was a gift for him. It allowed him to unlock his truest potential and who he wanted to be in the world. And suddenly his doubts and his insecurities could float into the background, and he could see a path that was available for him that wasn't available before we met. And so I felt like I might have had an impact on a child who I'll never meet, and a family who will get to grow and blossom because of one man's courage to be able to ask, what's your story? What a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this thing about we never know when we might be someone else's angel, right?
Yeah.
And you both were for each other because he got you to toss off that cloak.
Yeah.
And, you opened up just like he had created a slight little crack, and then the aperture opened for him to be able to see something unfold in his life that might have been hard to be thinking about.
Yeah. And in that moment, I saw that my story might be a gift for him, but I was totally clueless that in sharing my story, that he was actually giving a gift to me. And the book would have never been created if it wasn't for that critical moment of him being able to just be brave enough to pass time with a complete stranger as we were headed north on a highway that was boring.
And I like bringing up this relationship between safety, right? We can all play it safe, stay in our own little corner, stay under our cloak, not take the risk of being rude or intrusive. And then nothing will happen, right? Everything will just keep marching along as it has always been.
Yeah. If you want predictable, there you go.
Predictable, safe, and maybe not quite so interesting, but reliable. You can stay in that safety seat. So, again, as I was preparing for this and thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many connections here. So I'll give you the abbreviated version to make you chuckle, but it was April of 2017. Wasn't a Greyhound bus, it was an Amtrak train. And as I've sort of told this story before, it was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life because we were recently into the Trump era. And as a child of a Holocaust survivor, I had a lot of nervousness about all kinds of things. And this train pulled up. I was headed to DC, but it was a Sunday night. And so it wasn't a regular commuter train. It was going all the way to New Orleans, actually. And I go down on the platform and the train pulls up, and I've ridden many Amtrak trains in my life, and the doors don't open. Like, we're all standing there on the platform and the doors don't open, and they start lining everybody up. I've listened to a lot of Holocaust, like a kinder transport train things. I'm like flipped out. But anyway, they're lining everybody up to go one by one onto this train. And as I get up to the door where the conductor is, he says, how many people are in your party? And I say, one. He gives me a torn piece of paper with a number on it. I'm like ready to bolt like out of this train station as fast as I possibly can. Anyway, I take my number 196 mine was 97, right? 97. I'm on 97 and I get into the train, chaos. I find 97. Eventually this man comes up to me and he has 96. And he comes and sits next to me, and he's an African-American man. He's very tall, and I say to him, would you prefer the aisle or the window, whatever? And he's tall, so he's going to be on it all the way to Atlanta, so he takes the window. And I say, fine. And the one question, right? I just turned to him because I do have this habit of not sitting under the invisibility cloak, but actually of asking people questions wherever I go. And I just start by asking him, what are you going? Are you traveling away from Philadelphia or to Atlanta? Like, are you going or coming? I just started with a really simple closed-ended question, nothing very elaborate. And it opened up a story that went on for nonstop for 2 hours of his life. And I won't go into all of the pieces of it, but I will share this with you in terms of how it changed two people's lives. I said to him at one point, because we have a memoir of my father's life, because there were just all of these pieces, and as kids, we didn't know a lot of them either. So my mom had hired a memoirist, and I am listening to this man who had been everything from his story in Vietnam, growing up in North Philadelphia, his stories in Vietnam, to being a photojournalist, to having like photographed everybody from like Ice Cube to Michael Jordan to the Obamas, the Clintons, Oprah Winfrey. Like, he's sitting there showing me like his whole portfolio on the phone, and his brother having been one of the founding freedom fighters in Philadelphia and one of Martin Luther King's driver. I mean, it's just going on and on. Like, you couldn't, I was just extraordinary. The breadth of like what this man's life was, right? And I'm sitting there and I say to him at one point, so, have you ever thought about writing the story of your life? Like, do your kids know who you are? Right. And he, he kind of alluded to the fact that they knew bits and pieces, but not really the story. But how do you think that your life is worthy of, that? It felt very bizarre. Well, the long story short is I called him back up a couple of weeks later and I said to him, so have you been thinking about this? And he said, well, yeah, I've been thinking. And I said, I could tell that he would never really get to it. It'd be kind of a nice thing to think about, but he wouldn't get to it. And so I said to him, would you let me do that for you? And what? So a few months later, I was off with a friend of mine to Atlanta with my dictaphone, And we went down, and it was, the fact that it was Atlanta and King's Home and all these places that we could go and get the full story. And, it's not a Pulitzer Prize winner or anything. It was more for really creative for him and his kids. It's on Amazon too. But it was the gift of everything that you talk about in your book, right? I'm willing to know you. I want to see you. I want to hear you. I want to get you. And I want to walk like a piece of this journey with you. And the impact on him. And I was just thrilled. Like, there was the gift in both directions. But when he called me a couple months ago, actually, and said to me, would it be okay with you if I want to add to the story, like add to his own story, right? And I just was like, the fact that, again, this act of having done this, and then opened it up to where, for him to say that I want to expand on my story in this way. And then just for me, the thing of being able to be present witness to the miracle of somebody's life and to use something that I like so much, writing, to put it into practice. So anyway, you had a Greyhound, I had an Amtrak.
Wow. I'll tell you what I love most about your story is sometimes when people pick up the book, there's mechanical things in there, like ask an open-ended question, for example. And you made it really clear that you asked a closed-ended question. The mechanics matter less than who we are being while we do it. And so you asking a closed-ended question, if you were in school and there's right and wrong and you're living in that world of right and wrong, could be wrong. But push that aside and let go of right and wrong for a moment. There's a way that you showed up being curious and had enough courage to be curious, even though on some level you were stressed out because of all of the history of the Holocaust was showing up in you in a mechanical form, right? But you allowed yourself to be curious, and that curiosity is palatable. People can nearly touch it, right? People can feel it. People know when you're being genuinely curious. And when you want to see them, when your intention is, I am willing to know you, then people are willing to lean in, even if you're making a mistake, right? And the pre-story that you started with is people get all concerned about doing it wrong, that I might do some faux pas. And you might. And if you're in that place of curiosity, rather than in the place of judgment, curiosity is this doorway into this mysterious world in which, especially right now, people want to be seen and heard and alive. So if we can be that, our curious selves, and not get so hung up on right and wrong, there's magic to be had.
Well, let me ask you this based on the pandemic, because I'm imagining that you used to do a lot of your work in person, and you probably over a number of months have been online like many of us. How has the pandemic changed what or has it changed, but how might it have changed what people need most in terms of connection?
What do they need most? On some level, for many of the people that I'm interacting with, the stress caused by the unpredictability of their lives has allowed people to retreat and to focus, right? There's a way that when your brain is activated as a stress response, you focus in very narrowly. And when you do that focus, it's mostly about survival. How can I get through this next little bit? And it's related to food, water, and shelter, and maybe love. And what I've been experiencing and what I see people that are thirsty for is that wide perspective. And so instead of hyper focusing on one item, to be in a place in which the perspective is very wide, moving into that unknown, moving into that unpredictability. And, you know, what I hear people say is things like, I crave the water cooler. And I think what they're really saying is the unpredictability that happens at the water cooler. Like, I don't know what we're going to talk about. You know, the meeting after the meeting. And so to answer your question in a simple form, I think what people want, are craving, is to dance in that mysteriousness, to dance in that world in which I might discover something new about the person I work with. And to be surprised and delighted in that. Yeah, that's my answer.
And my answer, I'm sticking to it. When you were talking about it, I was thinking about the second layer of your pyramid, which is the rapport. And that sense of, okay, can I get comfortable? Can I feel safe with you? To go from the narrowly focused into my survival needs into opening up into the expanse, willing to enter the space of the unknown. Right? There's some level at which we want some security, we want some safety, we want to know that there's something solid to stand on. And when you talk about rapport, mostly in the book, you talk about the rapport with each other, but you do have the story, I think it's Brad in here, who, and you talk about when you teach the relationship with self, right? That those are the foundations, and whatever we can do in a space that builds rapport, that helps us to know this is a safe place, that these people, you know, are creating an environment where it is safe to now leave my comfort zone into something else. And, or if I can feel safe enough inside, then I can elevate up to those places, because we don't like to stay in the narrow places. We feel better in the expansive places. And yet that rapport provides, I think, a level of safety that enables us to be willing to go.
Yeah, we talk about rapport as building relationships of trust. And maybe the pandemic has elevated predictable trust. Like, I know that Sally's going to show up 3 minutes late for our 9 o'clock meeting, right? That's just how it always goes. And so you get to predict. And yet, what we're inviting with asking powerful questions is to move into this place where people are seen and heard and experienced for who they are, and maybe for who they want to be. And when my colleagues, the people that I'm working with, know that I'm willing to see them, then they're willing to contribute in a way that creates a certain kind of psychological safety that we all can step into, rather than to create an experience where I'm just showing up for my expertise. And my expertise is to say that what we're doing is wrong. And if I can show up with my full self and say, and move into the unknown, bring my expertise with me and move into the unknown. Well, I don't know how it's going to go this time. In the past, we kind of did this, but it's a new world now. And if I I wonder, right? This word that you brought up in the beginning, I wonder if, and people can move in that place of wonderment, then something awe-inspiring is possible rather than predictable.
I'd like to, if I were here and that were written in the book, I'd be like, okay, everybody take your highlighter, right? And put put your highlighter to that in the sense that I think if, we had the opportunity as we are right here, but, speaking to the world and say, why should you try this?
Mm.
Why should you even bother with this work? Why should you take the chance, even if it's a little uncomfortable in its mysteriousness and things like that, that this is the reason, right?
Mm.
As I said, I would be here with 5 or 6 hours with you, but I'm not going to get that. I realize, I don't know, maybe have you back 6 or 7 more times, but whatever it is, I feel like I have so many things, but I would be so remiss. I feel like if we didn't spend a little bit of time talking about education, because you came up, I think it sounds like both in strands of informal education and then formal education. And that is certainly my training of origin and where I spent the first number of years in my career too, is as a educator in the classroom, as a curriculum developer and things like that. And came to the moment where that bubble was burst about the fact that what we were doing in education was not actually as awe-inspiring as perhaps I always thought it was supposed to be. Right. And so I'm curious about your experience as being an educator, how you were bringing this question, asking powerful questions into that work, and what you were encountering back as you were pursuing those questions.
Mm-hmm. I guess on a personal level, one of the things that I wasn't really clear until it was pointed out to me is that I'm a learner and I love to learn. And I also have a learning disability, and that was never discovered K through 12. It was only discovered when I was a principal of a non-traditional school that I was able to connect with students, the students on the fringe, the way the rest of my staff couldn't. And I didn't think I had a magic bullet, but when I got enough of the students coming across that had similar enough diagnoses, I was like, wait a minute, maybe I kind of have that. And I went and got tested, and sure enough, I have these things that now I can put letters after, my name. Not academic letters, but letters of
diagnostic diagnoses.
I'm incomplete and I'm broken, right? And so
you're brilliant and different in the ways that we think of as being different.
Right. And so one of the things that I came upon is using listening as an example, that it wasn't really encouraged and it wasn't taught. It's amazing to think about, a K through 12 program and there not being what happens when you get out of your own way and really listen to the word as it's being uttered. But even in my graduate work, right, there wasn't a listening component, right? And so listening was one of these things that my wife actually helped make really clear. Was I was teaching at university and seeped in academia, and we had a number of guests over at our house. And after a particular evening and the guest left, my wife said, they didn't ask us a single question. Mm. And then we noticed this pattern that people would come and we would ask questions and be engrossed in their story. My business partner, Chad Littlefield, when he moved to a new town, had set up lots of these connecting conversations. And after about 20 or 30 of them, he realized he had to stop the conversation halfway and say, now it's your turn to ask me a question. And really be deliberate about changing the conversation. So one of the things that you alluded to early on in our conversation is that I think we're taught, and I unfortunately think our education system does this, is it inspires us not to be curious about the other, to be curious about the relationship and who the others are. And it might even inspire us to create otherness and separateness from others. And when my wife pointed it out that people weren't asking questions, there was a way that I got annoyed. Like, right. All right. So that this is happening on a universal level. What can I do to make it happen? And so we have these cards called We Connect cards. And at conferences and events, we hand everybody a card, and then we ask people to swap, ask each other questions and swap cards and go around. And there's a way that the room lights up with energy, not because of the cards, but because they're skipping the small talk and having a conversation that matters. And one of the things that I do is I pause and say, what are you noticing? What are you noticing about your listening? And almost every time people in some form or another say, I'm listening for commonalities. I can establish rapport and connect with somebody if I can find the things that I have in common with them. And I smile and I chuckle because I think our education system in the lunchroom was like, where's my peeps, right? Who is it that looks like me, that experienced the world like me, and I can sit down and be myself with them? And I don't think our education system inspires us to connect over differences. And I think that is the secret sauce that we all need to be jumping into. Wait a minute, you see the world very different than me. You've had a very different experience. Holocaust, like, what is that? Like, I'm totally curious, right? Like, what would that be like embedded into your conversations, embedded into how you dress, embedded into how you stand at the bus stop, right? It would show up in all that you're being. But I didn't have that experience. But if I could be curious about your experience with that, those differences would actually bring us closer together than me looking for the things that are the same. So I guess my soapbox of right now is be curious about the things that are different than you, and to be an open listener and to explore that unknown on a really adventurous level. Like, be adventurous. And I think that's where the divide that's showing up in so much of our national dialogue would start to melt away. And how great would it be to bring somebody to a dinner party who is totally different than you and to sit down and have a conversation? It would be unpredictable.
And to underscore what you just wrote, I think about the fact that, children are born curious, right?
Yes.
Little kids will have no inhibitions. I just got the blessing of spending part of this weekend with a 5-year-old, and, eyes just like light up, glowing all the time and exuberant and asking questions. There's zero inhibitions at all.
Yeah.
And to me, one of the sad parts that we encounter and coming from within that system is that if our education system really were restructured to inspire that curiosity, inspired about astronomy, all those kinds of things, and inspire it about each other,
Yeah.
We wouldn't then have to be spending adulthood trying to kind of reverse that, right? I mean, because school almost reverses the natural inclination of humans in their curiosity and shifts it towards things that are separate and competitive and comparative. And that is what then leads to our separateness and our inhibitions as adults. And then people like you and I are out there trying to rework that.
Yeah.
So that people can find their way back to something that was never really rude. It was what was natural.
Right. Yeah. I guess two things come to mind about that is, I don't know about your parents, but I think parents teach curiosity killed the cat, right? And it kind of just slides off the tongue. They don't know the rest of the poem, which is satisfaction brought it back. And to create an environment where we're curious. So somebody recently reached out on our website, and I think they're from a different country. And they basically asked a question about the rapport piece. So in the rapport piece in the book, there's a tool that says, find something that somebody is wearing and ask an open-ended question about it. And it's much more elaborate than that, but that's the essence of it. And her question was, but what if it's a scar or a leg, right? They only have one leg. And Chad wrote up this really beautiful response, which was accurate, in which he said, when somebody chooses what they're wearing, that is changeable, right? And they're taking a moment to thinking about how they're going to show up in the world, and they put that on. If you ask about something that's unchangeable, then that's far riskier. And, basically he was saying, start with the things that are changeable rather than the things that are unchangeable. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And we talk about that in the book. And yet, as I was reading his response, I remember one of my students in a classroom in which we were sharing this tool, and he was standing, we were practicing it, and he was standing in front of me, and there was nothing that I was curious about other than the scar on his forehead. And at this point, I already had a little bit of rapport, right? Because he was a student of mine. But I asked him about the scar on his forehead, and I got this story that nearly brought me to tears. And he was able to be really open and transparent about it. And I think the only reason why that worked is we together were creating a space in which we were curious with each other, that it was okay to be curious, that it was okay to be courageous enough to be curious, and that I wasn't going to get shot down in me taking a risk about asking him a scar. I might have got deflected. Oh, it was just this thing. But instead, he opened up and shared this really beautiful story. I forgot why I rambled down that path, but it seemed to connect.
And I think as I was listening to your response in that, going back to what you remarked, it's the quality of the being that came in the asking of the question too. We can tell when somebody asks a question, whether or not their whole self is really in that question. Like if we had a scale of 0 to 100% real, genuine curiosity, and sometimes we can detect somebody might be asking a question. Maybe it's even, as you said, mechanically a well-structured question, but there's not a genuine curiosity behind it. There's only kind of like a mild, or I'm still kind of mechanically going through this. Whereas when that whole self is there, when the curiosity is genuine and it's felt, typically much more likely to share.
Well, to add another layer of complexity to what you're saying, I think, generally speaking, we're really good at measuring, evaluating, and predicting people's intent. And so if I show up and don't say anything, and my intent is to get something from you, you know it, right? And you start putting up blocks and you're like, no, 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 I'm not giving that away, right? And you start creating a barrier between us. And this is why we say get really clear about the intent. And if I can create an intent that includes the needs of the whole, that also includes your needs, then we can uplift each other in that dynamic. So this moves beyond just who we are being as far as curiosity, which I totally agree with, and kind of comes back down to the foundational piece of intent and saying, am I showing up to get something? In some cases, that's fine. That your relationship might be transactional. Chad, at one point in his life, created a mantra for himself. We wanted to create memorable experiences. And so I remember driving with him, and he was creating memorable experiences everywhere. The cashier at the grocery store. But he also did it with the toll booth operator, right? That's totally transactional. It's like 30 seconds. But he wanted to create a memorable experience. And his intention came across, lit up her face. Like she was like excited to be there for that 30 seconds. It didn't take any longer, but it created a dynamic that wasn't there. And his intent was, I'm going to make this memorable for both of us.
I love that. And if, as a listener, your curiosity is sparked there or piqued, we're going to talk to Chad in a couple of weeks. So you'll want to keep coming back and being with us. Well, I want to have a chance to just play, because your focus in Ask Powerful Questions is creating conversations that matter, getting people, talking and creating connection. A lot of the work I do is about the reflection part. So there's the going in, and then there's the connection. So what a lot of the questions that I ask are really, how do we go about that work of self-work, as your, not homework, but self-work, as the student that you describe in the book named it. So I think let's just pitch a couple questions out. You've got some of your cards there that would be connection cards. And so maybe pick one or so that you'll throw out, and we'll just kind of demonstrate how does this work. And then I'll pitch one of my reflection questions out to you, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I have 3 sitting here, and I don't know why they're sitting here from a program. And green is fun and light, purple is self-reflection, and blue is deep.
All right. Well, since I would naturally incline toward purple or blue, I'll go with green.
Well, green is fun and light, and it's very simply is, what's something that's made you smile in the last 2 weeks?
Something that made me smile last 2 weeks. It's okay. We'll do 2 or 3. So maybe, or you can pull out another one. Well, this little girl, this 5-year-old, so this will combination between fun and light and deep, but this 5-year-old that I got to spend time with on Saturday at a picnic. Growing up, I never felt like the fun one. My mother, between she and her sister, she was not the fun one. She was the all serious one. I always felt like I was the serious one. When I was married, I felt like I always take everything so seriously, so intellectual and things like that. And had a harder time like letting loose. And in more recent years, it's really been learning to live in a kind of more free-spirited way. And so I'm at this picnic, and there's just this like remarkable little 5-year-old just lit up, shining and everything like that. And just allowing myself to light up, and we got bubbles, and the 2 of us, I mean, there's all these adults, because mostly everybody was adults except for the twin 5-year-olds, but we're adults, and the 2 of us are running around with our bubbles and blowing and catching bubbles. And then we lie down in this hammock, and she snuggled right into my arm, and we're just like sharing all these little secrets together. And it totally made me smile, both because how could you not smile with this delightful child? Also because I could feel myself like I had dropped all of the seriousness and inhibitions or fears and things like that had been present in much of my life, and could just feel the experience of being totally light in that moment.
What I loved about hearing your story is how you gave yourself permission, even though there was all these adults and there's a certain way that you should act. you gave yourself permission to dance in the delight, right? To be pleasantly surprised and not know what was going to show up next. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Let's see, for our listeners, mine don't have colors like that. So you're just going to have to choose some other way, right, left, middle, whatever. These cards are from, we have 3 decks: Live, Lead, and Love with the Courage to be Curious. And the Lead and the Love deck have half the questions that inspire self-reflection. So self-love in the Love deck, or self-reflection as a leader in the Leadership deck. And then the second half is about the other people, either the people I support in my team or about the person that I care about. So this is from the self-reflection side of it on a leadership card. So I don't know, we'll give these numbers. Let's see if I can do this backwards, like 1, 2.
The middle one.
Pick the middle one. Why not? Oh, and it's great. Actually, I'm telling you, you and I are running parallel paths here, but turn it this way, but I don't know if it can be seen. How do I play and nurture the childlike mind and heart within me?
So this is for me to answer personally, right? It's self-reflective. So I have 3 small kids, and if I can let go of being the provider and like the discipline piece and the when I can let go of all of that and just be an explorer, that shows up. Like, how is it that they see the world? What are they concerned about? What brings them joy? And the other answer is when I can sit and meditate and open my heart. So the words that I've been really using, I'm on a very intense journey right now with a lot going on. And it can cause me to kind of freeze up. And the words that I'm leaning into to create the future that I want to be creating is expansive love. Mm. And that helps me get away from the Hollywood version of what Hollywood says love is, or what somebody else says love is, and be in this place where my heart can just crack open even just a little bit wider. And when I'm in expansive love, there's no wrong and right. There's no judgment. There's just you and wholeness. And as closer I can get to wholeness, the more that joy shows up. The further I get from wholeness, the more stress shows up. There's not enough. There's not whatever the enoughness is. One of my students came up with enoughness the other day, and we all laughed. It was a word that she had chosen to kind of empower herself. And we were like, yes, you are enough. And there's a way that we could be delighted in how she shows up. But the conversation that she was having in her head was, I'm not enough. And I think it's a conversation a lot of us are having, right? I'm not enough. But when we can let go of I'm not enough and move into I am enough and into that wholeness, there's a way that joy and delight shows up.
I think of it, I'm sort of picturing enoughness as like a playground, maybe specifically a sandbox, right? And that's where joy and delight actually live, right? That's their home.
Yeah.
Because when
Yeah.
there isn't enoughness, like there's sort of not enough room for joy and delight. And when there's enoughness, they have this little home there.
Right. And enoughness is not about stuff.
Right.
Right. I'll be happy when I get that car. No, it'll be temporary. It's about moving into that wholeness. And part of the reason why we're conversating is because you see me as an author, but I don't see myself as an author. I see myself as somebody who's hired lots of editors. The writing piece is really challenging for me. And yet, if I can let go of that and say, wait a minute, there is something here to be said. Can I share this with the world? Is it enough? Can I be enough? Can it be enough? Is it of value? And if I can answer yes with that, then there's a way that I delight in doing the work. If I show up answering no to that, then the work is drudgery.
And while I love the book is, I think, what helped me to become aware of you. The reason you're here, because I've read many people's books, right? And they don't all get the same request for showing up as you did.
Thank you.
But it's the sense that the you-ness, the wholeness of you that comes through in here and that comes through in the stories that you share. And then I love listening. I listen to mostly Audible because what I didn't realize my learning disability was how difficult it is actually for me to absorb what comes in print, but so much easier through auditory. And getting to hear your voice because you didn't read the whole book, but then you brought yourself into pieces where you wanted to underscore or just bring your being, your heart into it. And there was something completely irresistible about that in how genuine and how much a part of you all of this is. It's not what you do, it's who you are.
Thanks for seeing that.
So at the very end of the book, I feel like we're at a book reading, except I'm the one reading your book for you. So at the end of the book, which is exactly where it should be, you begin with the end in the mind. This is probably the essence of the book. And when you've gotten to the end, you're like, okay, if you didn't get it all before, let me just give you the essence here. And you say, people want to know that there are others willing to know them. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want for people to get them and be really understood. They want to know that others feel what they feel. And by asking powerful questions to those around you, you can start exploring worlds other than just your own. Your world will open up and you will see things as you did not see before. People will feel connected. Moreover, from that place, we can begin to make a difference.
It's fun to hear your own words read back to you. I'm like,
Yeah, it sounded really good. I should have written that. Well, as I said, this is so fun. We could be here a very long time. I'm even looking over at my list of questions, most of which I didn't ask just because there were too many other things to talk about here. I do want to just mention for those people that, are going to find you at weand.me. And what I love your YouTube channel. So that is the big social media where you guys are. Chad has a lot of really fun stuff up there. You guys do a great job there and really demonstrating that connection is serious work, but it is fun and playful in getting to that seriousness, that the way that you bring this work to life and bring the joy and bring the sparks, let the brilliance come out in such beautiful ways. So check out the YouTube channel because that's where you'll see Will and Chad kind of shine there too. Of course, read the book. I've been telling people all month to read the book. So, of course, read the book. And, I know that you've done work with a whole variety of audiences, from everything from corporate training to places, as you've described, where we need to be having conversations that people typically have a difficult time accessing or doing well, and bringing these tools to help those conversations happen, because when they do happen, that's where magic emerges. And so I just want to, people who are listening and watching, and I hope you've been watching, because it's been really fun, visually to watch and see too, that you are that we have stopped at nothing to provoke your curiosity, to explore, to learn how to ask powerful questions, to how to create and even want to create conversations that really will help you to see the magic and the brilliance in all of the people that are just standing right around you, because the magic and the brilliance is everywhere.
I feel inspired to reach behind me. There's a connection toolkit, which has got a lot of our tools in it. But on the side of it, it says connection, belonging, and trust. And when I think of the trajectory of this conversation, there's a way that I have probably been more honest in this conversation with myself and with you, maybe than I've ever been on a podcast. And what's becoming clear to me is that I remember working with a CEO out of Texas, and she had, found about us, and she was looking on the website, and she was like, she was really concerned that if she told her peeps that she was going to engage with somebody whose job it is to bring connection, belonging, and trust into the world, that people might have a listening for that there's not enough trust in their organization. And so a part of our conversation was, what can we do to be amplifying connection, belonging, and trust, and not to make it so that you're wrong, right? That you're broken and that trust is not present. But what ended up happening with this CEO and this kind of dance that we were having as she was trying to figure out how to engage with us is that ultimately she wanted it was a marketing firm, and she wanted her peeps to be able to love her clients. And there's a way that I don't feel like I can go into Mr. or Mrs. CEO and shake their hand and say, I'm here to amplify love. Right? And then in some way in this conversation, we have been talking in that kind of light and fluffy way. And yet, as you know, part of our job is to be able to communicate where people are at and then to take them on a journey. What I noticed with the CEO was that if we are here to amplify connection, belonging, and trust, that ultimately we're here to amplify love so that people can love their work, love who they work with, do the work they love doing. Yeah. And so how do we create a space where people can show up as they are and move from this place of me and make it we? I guess that's the question I'm leaving you with.
That is what we are leaving you with. So if you're listening, and the toolkits, the cards that are part of We and Me, and take the journey, get willing to step on and take the journey with us. Well, thank you, Will. I can't even tell you how excited I am. I know I could keep you here for about 5 hours. We'd have to break the podcast into all these parts, but such an amazing opportunity to really talk about the power of being present, of asking those questions, to be able to go and take this journey that you've just described. So Thank you. And for those of you who are listening, you're either listening, you can be on Audible. If you really want to see Will, I love seeing him in person here. Head over to our YouTube channel. You can see that there. And if you have listened all the way through and not yet gone on to the weand.me website and bought some of their cards, their connection cards or toolkits, I don't really know what's wrong. And of course, you should be encouraged to be curious and buying all those decks too, because this is what needs to happen. This is how we need to repair humanity, is by bringing people together. So thank you for listening, and we will be back next week with our love episode in this strand as we think about the power of questions.